Good evening and welcome back to 31 Horror Nights. It's October 12th and tonight's movie is Late Night with the Devil. This is one of those movies that I was able to hear about organically in the years since doing the last Horror Nights, and I really should know better by now, but I'm pretty hopeful for this. When found footage horror, camera POV horror, was first introduced, it was such an odd concept and so few people were aware of it that the first few times it happened, a lot of people were convinced that it was real. The people who made the movie Cannibal Holocaust, usually cited as the first found footage horror movie, needed to actually demonstrate no, they didn't die, these are actors, they're not dead. And in the 90s, there was this UK television channel that made their own fake broadcast that was able to fool people. And I'm bringing that up because this movie is very much in the same vein. Late Night with the Devil is a horror movie about this late night talk show in 1977 who, during a live broadcast, attempted to communicate with the devil and things didn't go well. I have heard so many interesting things about this movie. I've heard it being compared to analog horror. It really just seems more like a found footage movie because there is a difference, but it does have that aesthetic. It also had some controversies for its use of AI generated images. And here's a part where I would like to cut in and talk about me for a moment. I have used AI generated art in the past for the album covers of the albums I've put out of music covers. And I realized that I had not properly disclosed that for the first three occurrences. I'm sure my rationale for that at the time was that I didn't pay for them. It was literally something you could just do on a website for free. And I also was never intending to make any money off of these albums. But I still should have disclosed that it was AI, and I fixed that. It is now disclosed in all the descriptions. I am sorry though, because the more I learn about generative AI, the more I learn how shady it can be, and at its best, it is used to cut corners because it cannot make anything better than an artist can. It can only make it faster. However, in a big production, especially in like an indie movie or a low budget movie, sometimes costs do need to be cut. And this is a tool that I think people can use as long as they're transparent about it and also don't try to copyright it and claim that it's theirs because it's literally not. When asked if this upcoming movie used AI generated art, because a lot of people were talking about that on Twitter, the directors clarified yes, three of the images used as interstitials were used with the help of generative AI and their own editing. I do think it's good that they were transparent about that. I just wish that that was something that they had said from the very beginning instead of something that they had to be asked about and clarify to it. However, they did disclose that it had AI generated art before the movie was released to the public. There are plenty of bad actors who use AI in very shady, unethical ways. I do not believe this movie is an example of that, however. And now, with that massive disclaimer out of the way, I'm going to go watch this movie. I get so stuck in my own head every time this happens, but after much internal deliberation, I am giving Late Night with the Devil a 10 out of 10. To clarify, a movie I would give a 10 out of 10 to is not one I think is perfect. It's not even one where there's nothing about it I don't like. I think a movie can get a 10 out of 10 if it is not only an amazing movie, it also goes the extra mile. And as long as you don't count the AI images, I absolutely believe this movie went the extra mile. It might seem that I'm harping on this, but this is a very serious topic to a lot of people. So let me just finish this up right now. It was very obvious which of the images were the ones generated by AI. They definitely had that like blurry look that a lot of AI art has. It wasn't bad, but it also wasn't anything interesting. Okay, putting that topic to rest. This movie was thoroughly engaging from start to finish. I knew by the time we were about to get to the very end that it was going to get at least a 9. But then it did the same thing that the Mortuary Collection did, where I'm thinking, this ending is great. I don't know what else they could do to make this better. And then they did it twice. But unlike the Mortuary Collection, which did have sort of a slow start, this one hit the ground running. It was engaging from start to finish. This movie is amazing, and I implore you, if this at all interests you, go check it out. Don't get spoiled for me. I went into this completely blind, and it was incredible. It starts out with this, like, narrated documentary type of stuff. They actually got Michael Ironside to do the voice for this. This intro is a few minutes long and just sort of gives you the background of this talk show and the host behind it, and then it will show you the recently made public or whatever footage of the final broadcast of the show, which took place on Halloween night 1977. And from then on, this is that broadcast and everything is playing out in real time. There are no breaks in between scenes. Even when the show in the movie goes on to commercials, you see behind the scenes footage, I think they called it, which is in black and white. Maybe it seems like a little sus the way that they just have like a handheld camera recording all the juicy bits, but that can be chalked up to the suspension of disbelief or even outside forces manipulating that. This broadcast is apparently happening at the start of Sweeps Week, which is a term I have not seen since like the last time I watched Bruce Almighty, which I guess is like a really important week in terms of ratings. And they want to have a really interesting show. They bring on someone who claims to be a medium and can communicate with ghosts, a professional magician turned professional skeptic, and also a scientist who sort of took in a girl who was spending her life being, I guess, groomed by a cult. And apparently, there is a demon inside of her that she can talk to under the right conditions. Along with the writing and the directing, the acting in this movie is spot on, with two performances in particular really standing out. The first is our frontman, Jack Delroy, played by David Dastmalchian, which I look at that last name and I really just want to say Dalmatian. And the other one is Ingrid Torelli as Lily, the girl with the demon inside of her. She's supposedly 13. She definitely looks older than that, but whatever. She stole the show. They definitely did their own thing with this character, but you could also see some clear influence from Reagan from The Exorcist or Nell from The Last Exorcism. Every word this character says is fascinating because she really does act like the 13-year-old girl she supposedly is, but there's just something about like the way that she phrases things or the way that she looks at things or the facial expressions. It's so subtle, but it's so ominous. One of my favorite parts of the movie was a very subtle moment, which really shouldn't feel like such a subtle moment, where at one point Jack like offhand says like, I'm worried that the show is going to get canceled because that's why they're doing something so crazy. They want to drive ratings up. And she says something along the lines of, Don't worry, sir. I have a feeling you're going to be very famous soon. And normally that would be like an obvious cheesy line. But the way she said it was played so straight, but with just enough behind it to be so chilling. And when it happened, it went right over Jack's head. He took that as a compliment. It's often a balancing act if you're going to be making a movie in real time, because without those breaks, it can often feel boring. It can often feel like just one scene that never ends. But they kept things interesting the entire time. They showed you all these different perspectives. And as the night went on, you could see all these different characters' perspectives develop at the events that are happening. The horror in this movie is great. The effects, most of them are really good. But the first real special effect you see is terrible. It's awful CGI. And there is at least one other example of that type of bad CGI, but when it used practical effects and like all the other times, it looks good. I have heard this compared to analog horror in the past. And while I still maintain that this really isn't analog horror, it's just like the format isn't the same, this is probably the closest to an actual analog horror movie out there. It did the thing a lot of analog horrors do, where the supernatural forces will like affect the film. And also, taking place in the late 70s, it does have that sort of vintage aesthetic. I think the main draw of this movie is the fact that you are seeing this situation take place in real time and you're watching it develop and develop and develop. But once it starts developing, it won't stop, no matter what anybody does. And you get to see all these different perspectives about it from all the different characters, but also from that like cold, clinical perspective of a camera. They say this in the movie, the camera doesn't lie. And saying that they stuck the landing with the ending would be an understatement. This ending is incredible. This is one of the best found footage movies I've ever seen, and I would highly recommend it if you want something scary to watch this Halloween. And before I go into spoilers, I just want to emphasize go check out this movie. Don't get spoiled by me. But that being said, the spoilers will start now. I'm really going to not just summarize this movie because I can't explain it in a way better than what you would get by just watching it. But one of the major things of context you get about this show is one thing that I already said, that the show's ratings are declining. I think one of the things that contributed to that was the fact that it started out as sort of like a duo between the host Jack and his wife, but the wife died of lung cancer despite not being a smoker. They mentioned that. They also mentioned that Jack was like a member of this weird club of like some of the most rich and powerful men from around the world all going to this one private park and then doing weird stuff in it completely separated from the public for like 2 weeks once a year. Apparently it's based off of something that's real, and reading the description, yeah, that kind of does sound like a cult or the Illuminati or something. And the dead wife thing actually does work into the story. The first guest for that Halloween broadcast is a medium, and it does kind of just feel like one of those like cold read lucky guest type of things. At least for the first one, because it doesn't really work, but the second one does work. But then he gets this weird name, Minnie, and nobody knows what he's talking about except for the host, because that was the name he had for his wife in private. And things get messy with the second guest, who is that professional skeptic. You know this character type. If you've seen a lot of movies, you've seen this character before. He does seem to have good intentions because he doesn't like the idea of people swindling impressionable, sad people out of their money, but he's also really smug about everything. So the medium has like one of these weird attacks, and then he vomits black sludge. That was the horrible effect I was talking about. It looks awful. He gets carried away by the paramedics, and it's revealed later in the movie that on his way to the hospital, he just died. And then we get the guests of the parapsychologist, her name is June, and the girl Lily. And the second guest, that professional skeptic, he comes at them very hard. And it gets to the point where someone, I don't remember who, says, well, do you think we can try talking to this demon here on air? And I don't remember who suggested that. But June's immediate reaction is, hell no. But she gets like booed from the audience and they act really disappointed. And that was the point where Jack decided to lean into that and try to convince her to do it. And at that point, she's put on the spot. She had been called a fraud, and now everyone around her is questioning her. So she agrees to do it, provided that they do everything her way. And this, like, session of talking to the demon inside of her is done wonderfully. There's like a different voice layered on top of hers. She gets these like facial scarrings that is very obviously an homage to Reagan from The Exorcist. She says stuff about Jack that she should never be able to actually know. She references that club that he went to, and the demon says, I've met you already. The chair just floats 5 feet off the ground with her in it. And then the demon just starts laying out way too much personal information about both June and Jack, to the point where she smacks her in the face and it was able to actually make it stop. And when they come back after that, that professional skeptic says he knows how they did it. And they briefly mention group hypnosis. And what they demonstrate is not like any hypnosis I've heard of in the real world. In the real world, hypnosis is a very much type of, you have to let it happen. It's not going to happen against your will. You need to want to be hypnotized. And when you're put in hypnotic sleep, you don't remember anything about what's going on. You're just in this trance and you're very suggestible. And this skeptic guy is able to make something very similar happen with another person who works on the show. It looks like there are worms crawling out of his body, and he like grabs his stomach and rips it open and worms just like spill out of it. But apparently he was able to hypnotize most of the people watching. Not everybody. They say there were a couple people in the room who didn't know what everybody else was freaking out about. And this guy, he was a pretty slick actor about it, because he acted like he was not in control of it anymore. Like he lost control. He acted like he was panicking, but no, he was in control the whole time. And when they play that back, the recording back, and I guess the implication is because you were watching it, you fell into the trance too, and that's how you saw what they were seeing. But when they play it back and everyone has snapped out of it, you don't see any of the things that you saw the first time. He's like miming ripping his stomach open. There's like no worms at all. And at this point, they had run overtime. They were supposed to have their next guest on right now, but Jack ignores the calls from the producer to end this part and bring it to the next one, because he says, well, if they really did what you did, we can play back the footage of the like seance from earlier and we would see something similar. And they do play it, and it's just like it was the first time. And even the first time I noticed that they did that thing where like one frame has like a weird image in it. The host notices that too and asks for it to be slowed down and played frame by frame. And for that one frame, it is an apparition of his dead wife. And at this point, the skeptic guy believes that this whole thing was set up by the network to drive up ratings. And at this point, the demon inside of Lily has just had enough. It performed for these people and it is still being undermined. So the demon lashes out. Her head splits open like a clicker, and it is just pandemonium. All the people on stage die in violent, spectacular ways except for Jack. And that is the point where the broadcast supposedly cuts out. And they do that thing where it's like you see the technical difficulty screen, and then it like warps and like falls apart, and then you see this like grainy blurry image in like the static or in like the grain of this black screen of this demonic face. And if the movie had ended there, it would have been great. It would have been a 9 out of 10. But then it kept going. You see Jack being sent to this like dreamlike world that's like made up of past moments of his show. And up until now, the broadcast footage had been in full screen 3:4, but now it's in widescreen. You see references to apparently there was something like occultic happening at that weird club that he was made to forget. And there's a mention of his greatest sacrifice. And then, like, right after that, he sees the image of his dying wife, and my jaw dropped. Without any words, they were able to reveal that his success was because of a sacrifice of his wife. The reason why she got lung cancer out of nowhere was because of demonic interference. And when Jack puts this together himself, he breaks down. And she asks him to end her pain, end her suffering. And there is a ceremonial dagger. So he drives it into her chest. And then, like, he blinks, goes back to reality, and he actually stabbed that 13-year-old girl in the chest. This was all another trick by this demon. And you see him now alone. Everybody else who didn't die escaped. And the police are coming. And he is just sitting there, completely broken by what has happened. And then the movie actually ends, and I was geeking out. This was so good. I want more people to watch this movie. It was great. I am very interested in what these two directors make going forward. In a market that is so oversaturated, where it feels like everything has been done before, this felt so new and fresh and interesting. It was drawing from a lot of the same things that make a lot of analog horror series on the internet so good. Every single moment, except for one ill placed joke towards the end, worked so well. It isn't often that I legitimately go into a movie with high expectations and it fully exceeds them. I thought this movie was incredible. Go check it out. I loved it. Thank you for listening. I'll see you tomorrow.